Alright, class, listen up. I've got an assignment for you. It's a small task. Boo-hoo, you have to go and watch a couple other videos before this one. Wah, my life is so hard. Before watching this video, you should listen to these two songs if you haven't already heard of them. Lingus by Snarky Puppy and Physical Education by Animals as Leaders. Both of these are their respective bands' most popular songs according to Spotify, and while I personally don't think they're the best songs from these two artists, they do give a good indication of the main appeal of each band. Pause the video now if you want to listen to these two songs if you haven't already. Links are in the description. Don't worry, we won't start back up until everybody's had a chance to listen, alright? We'll wait for you. Finally, some peace and quiet. Is everybody back? What'd you think of the songs? You liked them? Pretty cool, right? It was pretty neato songs. All right, so let's dive in now. Let's give a little context to these bands and start building up some sort of rapport. So, Snarky Puppy and Animals as Leaders. If you're a fan of progressive music or just a music head in general, you've probably heard these names kicking around for the past couple of years. And for good reason. They're both extremely technically skilled bands that have a knack for taking some popular trends in modern music and pushing them to their absolute limit without losing sight of accessibility. Snarky Puppy is a New York-based jazz fusion collective formed in 2003 with their debut album releasing in 2006. They take elements from quote-unquote traditional Miles Davis jazz fusion and meld it with genres like hip-hop, Latin, and electronic, as well as a host of others if you count all of their covers and collaborations. My first experience listening to this band, as I'm sure was the case for a lot of their fans, was watching the live recording of Lingus off of their 2014 album, We Like It Here. After I was exposed to that sound sometime around 2014 and 2015 when I was still in high school, I immediately became enthralled by their sound, and for the next few years, I would religiously listen to them, going back and listening to all of their previous commercial releases, as well as being on the lookout for any new project they might be working on. I didn't get into Animals as Leaders until much later, but I'll get to why in a sec. Animals as Leaders is a self-proclaimed progressive metal trio whose debut album released in 2008. They do fall under the umbrella of progressive metal, but that label doesn't fully cover the extent of their sound. There's more than meets the ear with this band, as they incorporate elements of electronic, house, and even classical guitar. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. Let's not be hasty though, alright? I want to say a few more things about Animals as Leaders before jumping to conclusions. I think the biggest disservice a fan of Animals as Leaders can do to someone who knows nothing about the band is to attempt to explain all the inner workings of one of their songs. This is exactly what happened to me the first time I heard this band. One of my friends tried to sit me down and explain every single subdivision in one of their songs, and I was struggling to understand why I should care. I don't listen to music to do math. This is exactly the attitude I expect most people would have if they got introduced to this band in this way. It gives off the impression that in order to fully appreciate the band, you need to know and understand how they're doing everything that they're doing. I'd argue that it's not necessary at all to know any of that, just as much as it's not necessary to know all the harmonic weirdness that goes into a Snarky Puppy song. It's enough just to understand that everything that Animals as Leaders is doing is quantifiable, and I even go back and forth as to whether or not that's necessary. Once I understood that you don't need to constantly be counting on your fingers and toes when you're listening to them, I was able to take a step back and fully appreciate the artistry that Animals as Leaders puts on display. Alright, so at this point you might be thinking to yourself, okay, cool, so you like these bands, why exactly should I care at all? Well, I'm getting to it, alright? Just hang on a second. Just be patient. I suspect that if you're a big fan of one of these bands, you might be quick to turn up your nose at the other within the first minute or so of listening to them. Even if you're not openly hostile to the other sound, you might just write it off as not your thing and move on, but I think if you did that, you'd be doing yourself a grave disservice. In my mind, these two bands occupy a similar niche, even though on the surface their sounds are about as different as you can get. And no, it's not because they're both instrumental bands. Okay, so I'm about to go on a long and protracted metaphor to try and explain my point here, and I'm gonna let out my inner dweeb in the process, so just take a second to prepare for that, okay? I'm not joking, it's gonna be a pretty bumpy ride. You're gonna want to, steel yourself for what's about to happen. Okay, so the best way that I can try and explain the way that I think about these two bands is to compare them to fantasy magic systems. Now, before you write me off as some pedantic asshole, let me try and explain what I mean here. In the fantasy genre, magic systems typically come in two varieties, hard and soft. For those unfamiliar, let me break it down this way. When you hear hard magic systems, think of things like alchemy from Full Metal Alchemist, bending from Avatar The Last Airbender, or spells and potions in Harry Potter. Each of these magic systems have a rigid set of rules that must be adhered to in order for the magic to be properly expressed, almost like the expression of a mathematical equation.
It's Leviosa, not Leviosa.
When you hear soft magic, you should think of Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, Melisandre from Game of Thrones, or the power of love and friendship and rainbows and sprinkles from Harry Potter. Anyway, with these magic systems, presumably there are some aspects that can be quantified, but the main inner workings of how this type of magic works are not meant to be understood by the audience, and they're made all the more impactful by how bewildering they are. As with almost everything, these terms aren't mutually exclusive. You can have elements of both hard and soft magic in the same world, as exemplified by Harry Potter and a host of other fantasy worlds. Right, so what does this have to do with animals as leaders in Snarky Puppy? Well, everything, really. And if you didn't see this coming, you haven't been paying attention. Animals as leaders is to hard magic, where Snarky Puppy is to soft magic. Not convinced? Well, let me see if I can't tie these two ideas closer together. A key word that I used to describe animals as leaders earlier is quantifiable. I mean this in that if you had sheet music for one of their songs, you could plug it into an annotating software and it would give a solid prediction of what their studio recording would sound like, at least in a rhythmic sense. It's almost programmable, like having two metronomes run at different tempos, but they regularly line up on a downbeat. Hard magic is quantifiable in a similar way. Gather all of the necessary elements in one place and you can predict what's going to happen next with almost absolute certainty. Both animals as leaders and hard magic systems run like clockwork, and they both share the scientific virtue of being repeatable. Snarky Puppy is, decidedly less quantifiable. I understand that that clip that I just showed was a bit of cherry picking, but it all stems from improvisation, which is a staple in jazz. This particular band does a good job of mixing both hard and soft ideas, but I think a lot of the appeal to these songs is to hear the crazy inventiveness of the soloists. Sometimes this backfires and you get to hear some dumbass shit for a while. But more often than not, the solos are the best parts of the song. I do want to say that the more structured parts of these songs are great as well, and much better than every other jazz fusion collective that I've heard, but they still mostly serve as some great structure for the solos to stand on. Tying this to soft magic, you can make the connection that the magician in this sense is the soloist. They're the only one who can predict what's going to happen next, and everyone else just has to look on and try to follow along with whatever they're doing. I think the word that best describes this connection between Snarky Puppy and soft magic is unpredictability. My favorite part of this metaphor is that magic doesn't exist in the real world. When you see some whack-ass magic being performed in a show or movie or book or whatever, you can still get the feeling of, wow, that is capital A awesome, even though you yourself are not a magician. In the same way, you don't have to be a musician, or at least a musician at the caliber of these ones, to be blown away by the whack-ass shit that they're doing. Let me end this with a disclaimer. Do I think that these artists intended for this to happen? Absolutely not. I just wanted to point out some cool and interesting connections between two of my favorite musical ensembles, and hopefully I've inspired some of you to check them out if you haven't already. Alright, thanks for watching this thinly veiled excuse to just gush about some shit that I like. I mostly made this video just to stall for time while I finish Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, so I could start working on that video, because that's going to be a review soon. It's definitely going to take a while. So if you're looking to keep up, if you're looking to see what I'm up to, then you can follow me on Twitter. I will be giving updates there because I'm looking into getting streaming started. So I'll be streaming soon. Hopefully, I'll also be getting an actual mic, so I'm not going to sound like a tin man anymore. But yeah, thanks to everyone who's subscribed. It really means a lot more than you probably realize. And if you aren't subscribed, you can just go and there's that little button down there that you could just hit if you really wanted to. Because I'm going to be coming out with a lot more cool stuff in the future. But anyway, yeah, thanks guys. That's it. See ya.
Oh, I get it. Don't be hasty.